Hello. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. Our focus today will be on depression in the workplace. My name is Neil Parekh, and my co host is Dawn Helmrich. Dawn, thank you so much for joining us. We are live on Facebook, I think, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and my website. And I'm just checking the Facebook link to see whether it's working. It looks like it is working. We weren't sure. We had some technical issues earlier today. So I'm glad that we're live on Facebook. That being said, okay, Dawn. So we got another show in
Here
front
we
of
are.
us. Folks, if you've been watching, this is the fourth episode of Shining Light on Shadows, a candid conversation about mental health. And I'd like to say it gets easier each time. The only thing I think I can say it gets different every time. Um, this is a show that we started in February to help reduce the stigma around mental health challenges. And, it's still hard to talk about. And there's some issues that are particularly challenging. We're going to talk about one of those issues today, depression in the workplace. How, what experiences we've had that Dawn and I have had. We're going to talk with our guest, Bryan Miller, who is the former New York Times restaurant critic in the 80s and 90s. He was a celebrity in New York City. And we're going to talk about confiding in colleagues at work, coping mechanisms. We'll also touch on the use of pharmacology and how that might help. But just as by way of a little background, this show is really the outgrowth of a show that I did last year with Candice Sanchez, and I'll be forever grateful to Candice for her work and her support. We had a show, I was co host for a show called Unspoken Conversations with Candice. Season 3 of her show focused on male survivors of sexual abuse, people like me. Mental health was a constant topic on that show. And it was really after talking about those issues for about a year that I felt comfortable talking about this and thought about actually producing a show. When I did that, and when I kind of put those ideas together, one of the first people I called was my good friend Dawn Helmrich. Um, I actually asked Dawn whether she'd be a guest on a show like that. Uh, Dawn, what was your response?
I said I would love to co-host the show with you. And as I've said before, I feel like I kind of pushed my way into to co-hosting with you, and I'm so glad that I did. This has been just quite a pleasure and quite a journey.
It was incredible, and I'm so thankful for you. Dawn is a mutual friend of mine and Candice. That's how I got to know Candice. Dawn herself is a survivor, and we connected through United Way and found a kinship very quickly. So I've actually always looked up to you, Dawn, as for your leadership on those issues and your advocacy work, and it helps gives me strength to talk about these issues. So I wanted to thank you for that. I want to say hi to some of the folks who are watching. Rochelle Kritzer, Philippek is watching from Hastings on Hudson, New York. Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us. Rochelle is a neighbor of mine, or actually from where my mom lives in Hastings, where I grew up. And she will actually be a guest on our show later in the year. So I'm looking forward to that. Rochelle was a school psychologist for about 30 years, if I'm not mistaken. My friend Apollo Ali is watching from Philadelphia. Glad to be here. Thank you, Apollo. Apollo is a colleague at Digimentors. So thank you, Apollo. And I'll say more about Digimentors later. My mom is watching, and she's saying I can watch on Facebook. Thank you, Mom. I gave her a heads up just before we went live that Facebook may not be working, so I'm glad that that wasn't a problem. Ron Thomas is watching from Verona, New Jersey. Ron, thank you so much. Ron is a friend, an expert in HR, actually. He's based in Dubai and speaks internationally. So, Ron, we definitely would be interested in your thoughts on this subject in terms of how people handle mental health in the workplace. Is it still as much of a stigma as I think it is, and I think other people still think it is? Would be curious about your thoughts. Marilyn Zayfert is watching from Staten Island. At least I know she's in Staten Island. Most of the time, she might be in California though. I know she's gone bi-coastal, so let us know, Marilyn. But nice to see you. She says this evening, so I'm thinking she might be back on the East Coast. Melissa Lutke switched her schedule to be here. Melissa, thank you so much. She actually emailed me, I don't know, half an hour before the show saying, I love this topic. I'm just going to have to catch it on replay. And I'm thrilled that she's here. So, Melissa, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. That means so much. Um, Dawn, would you mind saying hello to our next viewer? I think you know him.
Yes, I do. He's sitting in the other room and he is my fiance and he has watched every single show and was on last week's show. So I'm so grateful to have him here.
That was an incredible show, Jim, and I've gotten a chance to meet Jim as well. But we did a special show focusing on introverts and extroverts dealing with anxiety and depression. So thank you, Jim, for doing that. If you missed that show, you can certainly find that episode and other blog posts on the website for the show, neilparekh.org, Shining Light on Shadows. neilparekh.org, Shining Light on Shadows. I do want to give a shout out to folks who are watching on Instagram. Doreen Rogers is watching, a colleague of ours from United Way. She gave us a little heart in the comments. And then Dave Klein is watching as well on your Instagram, Dawn. And my our friend Tracy Teo is watching on my Instagram. Tracy is her son and my daughter were in preschool together, so she's a friend here in Northern Virginia. Thank you so much, Tracy. Really appreciate you tuning in. Um, we have a few more other people watching. Uh, Etney McMahon watching from Chicago. Found out about from Carol Peters at United Way Next. Thank you so much. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right, so my apologies. Ethne, maybe. But Carol Peters is the head of United Way Next, which is effectively the United Way alumni organization that Dawn and I are both uh, part of. She still works with her United Way. I worked at a local United Way and the national organization for a number of years. So thank you very much for joining. So, so with that, I want to give a little bit more background on the topic and the conversation we're going to have today. It's and before I do that, though, I want to make sure I don't forget to thank Digimentors. Digimentors is the consulting firm that I'm a part of, and they are supporting this production on a pro bono basis. So really appreciate all of their support, giving me the time and the resources to put this together, also helping to publicize it. We do digital marketing, events and programs like this, strategic communications, trainings and workshops. We also help with staffing and recruiting. We do a lot of event amplification, and Sri Srinivasan, our CEO, is also doing a number of workshops on AI. So thank you to my colleagues at Digimentors. With that, what I wanted to do is to give a little bit more background on this topic. One thing that we've been doing for each of these episodes is that Dawn and I have been writing blog posts exploring the topic in a little bit more detail and connecting it to our own experience. And our guests have also written blog posts. Again, you can find them on our website. For my blog post, I focused on depression in the workplace and when working from home. Think of those as two different things. The quote that I highlighted: people who suffer from anxiety, depression, or other mental health challenges are often called good actors. They can convince the world they're okay, even when they're anything but okay. And that certainly was my experience for a number of years. I know that I've had challenges in both, kind of all different kinds of scenarios. I have the most difficulty when I'm working from home, when I have a completely open schedule, I have no structure, and I'm left to my own devices. Um, there were several times when Pam, my wife, was out of the country, and I can only say, I mean, this is several years ago, but I fell apart. I mean, I literally fell apart, and I was not functioning at all. There's a particular episode I talk about in the blog post, which we'll get to later, when in fact she was actually in the country, but I had difficulty when I was working as a consultant. This is before Zoom meetings, and it's like we were maybe going into the office once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, maybe for meetings. But in between, you're just working on your own on email and stuff, phone calls. So you didn't have to kind of show up and be present. So that was definitely challenging, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Dawn, can you talk a little bit about the blog post you wrote?
I sure can. So I've had a bit of a different experience. Now I've worked in my job for almost 19 years, but I was almost forced to share my mental health journey. I had a situation, as Neil said, I'm a survivor of sexual assault, and one of my perpetrators had gotten out of jail, prison, and was kind of following me. And my victim witness advocate said that I needed to share with my employer what was going on, and I was really afraid. And as my quote says, I was afraid that if my boss and others knew what was going on, they would think that I wasn't capable of doing my job. And I'm very fortunate because I got a very, very different reaction than I had expected. And through my conversations with Neil and Brian and other people, I've come to realize that that's kind of a rarity. That my employer provided a lot of support, introduced me to the employee assistance program, and really helped me to understand that that I had opportunities to take mental health breaks. I had mental health days where I worked that I could use, and that it was okay to not be okay. And that was the first time that I had experienced that kind of support in the workplace. So my experience is very different than a lot of people's, I think.
And that's wonderful. And as you mentioned, it's one of the main reasons why you enjoy and appreciate working at United Way. It's something that not everyone gets to experience, and you know, I'm- I couldn't imagine talking about this before we launched the show. I'd always kept quiet about it. I wouldn't be able to use the words that I suffer from anxiety or depression, much less see a therapist. I just assumed that if I said that, people would, you know, give me side eye and kind of wonder whether I was reliable. And even in this moment, Don, I have to share that I'm putting this out there to the world, right? On LinkedIn, on Twitter, we have clients that are on the email list. We have professional contacts, and I'm thinking to myself, am I doing the right thing? I mean, am I are potential clients or current clients going to wonder if I'm trustworthy, if I'm reliable? I can only hope that uh, you know I can get through that, but that is kind of nagging at me a little bit. Um, Before I introduce Brian's blog post, I want to just acknowledge another colleague from Digimentor, Stefan Kaplan, who's joining us, and he will be a guest on our show in May. So, Stefan, thank you very much. Pradnya Haldapur is watching from Silver Spring, another colleague, and another person who will be a guest. We don't have the date yet, but we will have her. And I know she's particularly interested in workplace depression in the workplace and how people cope, and these issues around confiding with colleagues. So thank you for joining us, Pradnya. And my mom says that it's thank you to both me and Don for providing a community service in addition to helping ourselves. Um, and before I bring on Bryan, I have to give a shout out to a high school friend of mine, Paul Baya, who we've chatted on Facebook a few times. Haven't seen him in years. I know he's traveling in Tokyo, but so it means so much that you're watching, Paul. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Um, with that, here's the blog post that Bryan Miller wrote for us with the title "The Onset of a Depression That Almost Took Everything." One of the most trying challenges for anyone afflicted with serious depression or anxiety is coping in the workplace. And his blog post kind of sets the scene and then talks about his very first days on the job. With that, I'd like to bring on Bryan Miller and have him talk a little bit more about his blog post and his experience. Bryan, thank
Thank
you so
you.
much for
Thank you.
joining us.
I lost my light, so my skin may not be Trumpy and warm. It was I had a red, I had a kind of a what a, Neil said, buy a light. So I bought it's Staples. I bought this thing, and now it's not working. So I hope you can see
you,
me.
you look great. You look
Yeah.
great.
This is a huge topic. We can probably do several shows on it. I'll start by saying I was felled by what's called bipolar 2. And bipolar 2, and I was 30 years of age at the time, which is a very typical age for the onset of depression. Bipolar 2 is, as opposed to bipolar 1, is when you're depressed and that more or less either all the time or episodically. Bipolar 1 is what we think of as manic depression, where you can have highs and lows and vacillating. I never had that. What my condition was, I would be fine, absolutely fine for usually a week to 10 days. Then I would go down for a week to 10 days. You could almost set my clock by it. Then I came back up for 10 days. So it was bad and it was good, because when the good days came, I would just work triple time and get some work done. But in any case, yes, in my case, the roof fell in. I was about 30 years of age, and it just coincided with my interviews at the New York Times for a full-time position. Had been freelancing for 3 years, and eventually, the door was cracked open a little more, and finally my foot was in, and I had gone through several minor interviews, but now I had to meet the two top editors at the time, Arthur Gelb, who was sort of in charge of all the cultural report and the special sections, and then of course Abe Rosenthal. I'm sure a lot of people on this call know both of them. So I was in my down period, and I had only been depressed. I mean, it had only started like 6 weeks before, so I didn't know what was going on. I thought, do I have a brain tumor? Am I just losing my mind? I didn't know anything about depression. I went to the Greenwich Library and started reading up about it because I had no idea what it was. So I went into my first interview with Arthur Gelb, and he's a very animated man and emotional and fast talker. And I felt as if I were there, but I wasn't quite there. I felt sometimes I was floating in the ceiling looking at myself on his couch. But we were talking about how depressed people are great actors. Well, I got through that meeting, Then the final one was the laying of the hands by Abe Rosenthal. He wants to interview every reporter, personally interview, who's considered for hiring. So I went in there, and he's just the opposite. He's kind of an intimidating character, serious. In my book, I described him as a typical old-fashioned journalist. I call him. He looked like a walking unmade bed. He was all. He was always all disheveled, and his shirts like he had slept in. Anyway, he told me, "Oh, relax, take care. This is just a casual talk." And once again, I was there, but I wasn't there. There was a line I have in my book says, "I wasn't dead, but I wasn't fully alive." And so I just was not my effervescent self, I guess. And we went through the meeting and a lot of perfunctory questions, and that was it. So I left, and I thought, well, I made it. Well, the next day I learned that Abe did not think I was Times material, and he did not recommend the hire. Make a long story short, eventually they did hire me. The following week, they met with the other editors. So here I am, starting at the New York Times. I'm depressed. I'm on a 6-month probation, as are all new hires. And the executive editor thinks I'm a slacker. So I had everything going wrong for me. And so in terms of, we're talking about confiding, I certainly was far from confiding at that point. And it was a very, very, very tough struggle, even those first 6 months. And I did not confide in anyone. And then about 9 months later, I guess I was doing pretty well. The thing about depression is part of it is the belief that you can't do something. Let's say there's an important meeting and you feel horrible and you just don't want to go in there. But you have to force yourself to go in. And when it's over, you say to yourself, well, I got through it. It's like the old line about the dog dancing on his hind legs, how it's not done well, but you're surprised it's done at all. And I felt the same way. When you're depressed, you feel you're incapable of doing things that actually you're capable of doing them. And for me, it was writing, which was torture. And I was sure that what I was turning in was really substandard work. But the editors seemed to like it, and I had no negative comments. So 9 months later, I'm with my wife. We were in Italy, and I was in very bad shape there. I just wanted to come home. I could barely walk. I was so depressed. So one day in the hotel, I pick up the International Herald Tribune, and there's a story saying, best job in the world, up for grabs. I read it, and it says, New York Times restaurant critic Mimi Sheraton has quit the paper in a huff. And I said to Ann, I said, shit, we better go home. Because my worst nightmare was, could be coming true. Sure enough, when we got back, Arthur called me in, and once again, I had to, do I confide? What do I do? I cannot take this high-profile job, very high-profile job, but what am I going to say? So we were also talking earlier with Neil Dawn about how depressed people are Academy Award liars. You lie all the time. You lie why you didn't come to a meeting. You lie why you didn't go to a party. You lie. So I said to Arthur, I said, I've only been at the paper 9 months. and have that big bright spotlight on me. I just don't think I'm ready for it. And he was flabbergasted. Someone would turn down a job like that, a critic's job at the New York Times. I think there were only 6 or 7 of them. And he couldn't believe it. And he kept me in the office like an hour. And I said, and my wife feels the same way. She just doesn't think it would be a good idea right now. So I go out of the office. 3 or 4 months later, the person who had been the fill-in until they found someone, was not what they had expected. So then Arthur called me in again, and I was still in pretty bad shape. And he said, this time I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. And I don't want to hear about your wife. I don't want to hear about your, the spotlight on your head. He says, Abe Rosenthal's coming in here in 5 minutes. And I want you to get up, shake his hand, and thank him so much for his confidence in you having this job. And if you don't, he turned around, he went, his office was overlooking, I'll never forget, Broadway. It was a chorus line was just opened. And he pulls up the window and said, if you don't take it, I'm going to throw you out this goddamn window. So I went back to my desk. I called on and I said, put on your dancing shoes. And that was the last time we had a home cooked meal in 10 years. We never had a meal.
So
in any case, the case was.
So you took the job and you went through, like a dozen years of suffering from debilitating depression and having this whole high profile job at the same time.
Yeah. I had one of the most social lives in New York City while suffering from the most misanthropic of illnesses. So going out, once again, for me, going to a restaurant was like going to the office. And many times, and I described this in the book, I would stand outside the restaurant. I didn't want to go in. I just didn't want to go in. And I didn't want to spend 3 hours with people at dinner. And usually I was kind of the host. But I just forced myself in. And once again, I did it. And it was over. I said, well, I did it. I can do it. But it didn't make it any easier the next time. That's about depression. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't react like normal emotions. So the next time I go to a restaurant, I just felt awful. Unless I was during one of my good periods. And when I had my 10-day streaks of absolute perfect well-being, it was a joy. I was the luckiest person in the world to have this job, and I loved writing. But I knew the clock was ticking, and I knew almost to the hour when I was going to go down. Oh, just one thing about there's something I read. There's a writer named Wilfred Sheed. He wrote Sophie's Place, Sophie's Choice, and other things. A great writer, and he had a very difficult bout, and he has a book. It's called Daylight. Something Daylight, I forget it. But I put this as the prologue to my book, is his quote, words are for what other people have been through, and nobody who has been through this particular experience has ever been able to convey it to anyone who hasn't, perhaps for the simple reason that it has no features to speak of. It is nothing to the nth power, nothing heightened to the screaming point. And that's, the issue of confiding. Confide what? I mean, it's not like you have a cast on your leg that people can sign with a marking pen. You can't describe it. There's no, people cannot relate to it. And So I remember one of the very few times I confided in my immediate boss, editor of the weekend section, to whom I um, submitted my material. So took her to a fancy restaurant for lunch, and she was a friend. It was a friend. I thought, I've got to tell someone. I have to tell someone. So I thought, well, I'll tell Annette. And so we went there, and I had it all rehearsed. And I just basically told her what I just told you. And I wanted to know how it was affecting my work. So I go on for like 5 minutes, pouring my heart out. And she turns to me and says, "Why are you telling me this?" And that, in a way, is typical to people who just don't know what you're talking about. They can't, there's so much to cover here.
What were you, Brian? I'm gonna jump in and ask you if that's how she responded. Did you have any idea or any kind of thought on how you were hoping she'd respond? Was there? Did you just want her to listen, or what were you thinking?
I had never really confided to anyone. I wasn't quite sure. I thought she would, have empathy and, how can I help you? And, if you're having trouble, just be
Basic.
a friend.
Yeah.
But it's, depression, it's like punching a ghost. She just didn't really know, maybe she thought I was having troubles at work, but she just didn't get, maybe I wasn't clear enough, but I have found that in other cases, and a quick digression is the most meaningful, astounding reaction to confiding about depression is, since I've been better for 20 years, I'm fine. But since I've been better, I've organized some, I guess you call it like group therapy, but have like 7 or 8 people who go in a room, we sit down, they're all having problems. And I went to one while I was still at the Times, I heard about it. When I walked into that room the first time, it was like, I can't explain it. I looked at these people in the eye, and they knew what I was talking about. They knew, we started sharing experiences, and we didn't even need to verbalize a lot of it. I saw in their eyes their fatigue and their sadness and their fear. And so I've done that fairly often because I know it helped me a lot, and I think it helped them.
I want to bring Dawn in real quick in terms of this issue of confiding. Dawn, you talked about it earlier in terms of your experience with United Way. Um, do you have did you have a sense of how you were hoping they would react, and they reacted kind of on par, or did you also go in with not really knowing what to expect?
I was pretty terrified. Like was the beginning of my career, and I had that same like fear that like they were going to see right through me and know that I was not high functioning, and I wasn't high functioning at the time. And Brian talked about being there but not being all there. I spend probably 2 or 3 days out of my week doing the best I could with what I had, and really struggling a lot. So I think that they probably handled it better than I even had hoped that they were going to handle. Like I thought maybe, they'd be like, okay, good to know. Kind of like Brian's friend, just like, I'm not sure why you're telling, okay, we want to be aware of this, fine. And move on. But they were much more supportive than I had anticipated. I just wanted to also touch on something that Brian said, which I think is something that I've found that I'm really in tune to, and I don't know if you are, Neil.
Mhm.
But like, I know my people. Like, I can sense when who I can tell and who I can't tell. Like, I just somehow, some way, there, I just get this sense when I look in people's eyes, like this person is going to understand, or is going to know, or is going to be able to relate to who I am, and how I feel, and what I think, and what I experience. And but I also know the ones that I don't think are going to be able
Yeah.
to do that.
I
And
have no
then-
idea how people are going to react. I mean, I talked about in the blog post. Uh, I I had at the end of the day, it was a good experience. But I mentioned earlier that I was working with this group, um, the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, when I was living in Seattle. This is about 2006, maybe 2007. And after I organized a meeting, some kind of workshop, I got so overwhelmed with how it went, how I thought it was going to go, whether I did a good job or not. Something kind of, kind of didn't connect. And I just got so overwhelmed that I couldn't engage with people. I couldn't check email. I couldn't call in. I couldn't talk to my colleagues. And I ended up ghosting them for about a month. And I wasn't an employee, so I wasn't kind of expected to be in every day, but it's still, they had to pick up the slack. They didn't know what was going on.
Mhm.
Um, and I ended up going, eventually calling the executive director and, saying, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And we went for a walk. And I actually reconnected with him earlier this week. I talked to him a little bit because I wanted him to know I was going to talk about that incident. Um, I I don't. He didn't really understand what was going on, and neither
Mhm.
did another colleague. They didn't know what to make of. I mean, who does that, right? Um, I will say that they were empathetic, and they were supportive as best they could. Um, One of the things that I haven't shared, and I know Brian, this you talk about this in your book, um, Dining in the Dark, which,
Mhm.
so that the glare is out of the way. A fascinating read. I remember when I interviewed for the New York Times read along, spent a lot of time poring over it. Um, it had gotten so bad for me in that period of time. And this is something that I shared with Dawn early on. I didn't think I'd actually talk about this on this series on any episode. Um, I actually did have a moment of suicidal ideation. I imagined myself stepping in front of a bus. I wasn't on the sidewalk. I wasn't looking at a bus. I was in a park on a park bench. But I was so scared by that
Mhm.
that's what prompted me to get help. I called a therapist. I found a therapist, started seeing someone, went on medication for about 6 months. I think a low dose of Xanax, and was able to crawl back out of that hole. But
Mhm.
that was one of the lowest points I had. I know, Brian, one of the questions that we're getting from the audience, and you can speak to this, is how did you kind of get better? How did you achieve better? They're
Mhm.
asking medication or therapy. Can you speak to that?
Yes, just I'll make one point before we go,
Please.
having to do with the topic here. When I hold these group sessions, maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 people. Once you start to do it, this one's parent has a child who needs help or whatever. Um, the vast majority, the first thing they talk about is difficulties at work. They're afraid they're going to get fired. They just can't go in. Should they? How do you deal with? Does your company have any accommodations for this? But mostly just how am I going to get through the day? My boss is going to see this and I'm going to get fired. And some did. Okay, as far as, well, my story is very complicated. I would say, depression, maybe two major causes of depression. One is a biochemical abnormality in your brain. Now, we know a lot about the brain. We know where different points are. They can, we know where your happiness part of the brain is, and your fear and your intellect. But we don't know where this depression comes from and why. I mean, we know that serotonin and epinephrine, which are two compounds that control mood, but why do they go up? Why do they go down? So it turns out that I had that. It was very complicated. Then it's emotional. And one thing I learned about this whole experience that I was really just really surprised about is the power of early childhood experiences, and how, we all say, oh, children are so resilient. They're resilient because they look as if they're better kids, and they're not adults, so they can't really express emotion. My father died when I was 3 years old. He was 25. And it turns out that was a major, major part of my depression. And for years, I was in therapy. When I first started therapy, the first thing they ask is, do you have any, early childhood trauma? I said, no. So I was only 3 years old. I really don't remember anything. Well, it turns out I remembered a lot. So those were the two tracks. So, I had, two things to deal with. When I give advice to people, the first thing, get on medication, right away. Because if you're in really bad shape, you can't avail yourself of the benefits of psychotherapy as much. So I always advise people to do both. And that's what I did. I was taking 123 pills a week because, it's still an imprecise science. And even today, even when I started, the drugs usually took, if they were going to work, which is like 60% of the time, 4 to 6 weeks before you start feeling improvement. Well, 4 to 6 weeks is like 5 years to a depressed person. But I did that. I had a very, very, very renowned psychopharmacologist, as opposed to just a psychiatrist. They actually specialize in the medications. Took a long time because he said mine was very, very complicated. And I kept swinging him. He would get me better, and then I would start going down again, and then normal and down. Eventually I had a breakthrough in therapy. And they both sort of coincided at the same time. And I got better, and I have not had, any depression since. It's been almost 20 years.
I want to bring in a few other comments, Bryan. Sorry to interrupt. A few more people who are checking in. Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Jonathan, thank you for watching. And Paula is watching from Tallahassee, Florida. Thank you, Paula. Definitely, a lot of great comments. Pradnya said earlier that this is riveting. She's so grateful for you sharing your story. She quoted you talking about the most misanthropic of illnesses. She thinks that was spot on. Doreen Rogers wrote on Instagram when you were talking about the earlier about showing up and kind of being a good actor. She says and the energy it takes to force yourself and the exhaustion afterward when you push yourself through. So I thought that was interesting. She's watching on Instagram. Dawn, on your page, Sarah Bartz, Alex Antonio, Kristen Cow, I think. Jennifer Ward, Jeannie Newman, Arnold Chun, Pallavi Mehta, my cousin, Merritt Becker, a lot of folks watching on all sorts of channels.
Mhm.
But Cindy Oak, another high school friend of mine, says it's overwhelming to most people to get into helping a friend and acquaintance with depression. And certainly it does take a lot for folks.
Actually, I used to say, I still say, I wish that, you know, as helpful as my psychotherapist was, I wish that he could be depressed for one day to know what it's really like, because no matter how much you've studied or how many patients you've seen, you have to experience it. If he could just, he could experience it for an hour. It's so horrible that 1 hour would make him so much more informed, incisive, and helpful person.
Sure.
But
I want to,
once again, because there's no there, and it's just hard to, you know.
I'm going to put it on the screen real quick, but it's a big comment, so I'm going to take it off. But Don, our friend Kate Easton, has a long comment. It can be very challenging to respect my boundaries and do what I need to take care of myself and my mental health in the workplace when the majority of my work is supporting parents with significant trauma and mental health issues. I experienced a great deal of secondary trauma as well as dealing with my own mental health challenges with PTSD and bipolar 1. Spending your day pretending you are okay at work is exhausting. I so much appreciate your perspective, Bryan. The fear of confiding is so, and she has a dot, dot, dot.
Mhm.
I think she's challenged by that. Dawn, were you going to jump in real quick?
Yeah, I was just circle back to something that Bryan just said about having a therapist experience depression for 1 hour. And my son, who has a lot of mental health issues, he has a psychotherapist as well, who we always joke has absolutely no idea what he's actually going through, but understands medicine and
Mhm.
can give him the appropriate and proper combination of medicine to help him. But yet his conversations with this person, this individual, his med checks, he just afterwards is like, this person has absolutely no idea what it is that I'm going through. But it's the only person that he has that can really help him
Yeah,
figure out what the best combination of medicine is for him. So
yeah, they're close, but I can touch on another thing. We're, just very quickly, getting through the day at work.
Mm,
It's kind of intuitive, but one thing, compartmentalize your day. Don't go to work and seeing this, this vast forest, impenetrable forest in front of you. Try and break it down into, get to work, have my coffee, do this, like go to that Thursday meeting, and that's done. And then you treat the next piece. This is kind of intuitive, but you break your day up, and in between, give yourself a break. Take a walk. I it would be so bad at times. I would just leave the building on West 43rd Street and walk to the East River and walk back. It's like 20 minutes each way, and sometimes twice, just to break up my day. It was something to do. And I often took, of course, in my position, I could do that. Because as a critic, I was, as long as I fed the lion twice a week with my copy, they didn't bother me. So I could come and go as I pleased. So I was a little bit easier, but I just wonder what it's like if you're a truck driver or you're an accountant or if you're a bank teller, to go through the day like that without a chance to break up your day. I don't know. I can't imagine. It's
I think
interesting.
it's a different challenge for each person. I know for me, if I when I don't have anything on my schedule, that's when I'm in trouble. If I, if I don't have meetings, if I don't have, something that's due that day, like an open schedule is my worst enemy.
Hmm.
Um, because I just get, I don't know where to start with stuff. Apollo says that in his experience, we're talking about mental health professionals. Um, in my experience, mental health professionals didn't listen to me. Um, and it took me 15 years to get a comorbidity treated, moved to a better zip code, a posh zip code, and I paid up front and got top notch treatment. Today I jog, so that's a win for me. Clear headed, present, and highly functioning. It took time to get here.
Hmm.
And I think that's something else. I mean, with your experience, I mean, it took time. It was a long road for folks.
Yeah.
I want to
Neil,
make
can I
sure we
just
bring in. So go ahead, John.
I just wanted to pop in really quickly because I know that like when I read Bryan's blog, um that I learned something about myself, and that is
Mm,
that like that's how I function on a daily basis. Like my whole life is compartmentalizing my day. I know that if I can get out of bed, take a shower, make my coffee, that I've like made it through step 1.
Hmm.
And I've accomplished that, and now I'm going to go on to step 2. And that's how I get through like every single one of my days. And I thought that like that's just logical, it's what people do. Only to find out that like that is a really big coping mechanism for me in order to be very high functioning. So I just
Hmm.
wanted to add that in there.
sure. And I want to just go back to Kate's comment because looking on the Facebook page, the end of the comment was that I so much appreciate your perspective, Brian. The fear of confiding is so real, and dealing with the reactions you receive. I'm sorry that it was cut off earlier, but I wanted to make sure to read the full
Hmm.
comment there. Um, we had okay, Alexis is joining us. Alexis Randa is a bank teller, Brian,
Hmm.
uh, and it's impossible to get away.
Yes,
Uh,
I was in the bank last week, and I was just thinking that. Look, what do they do? I mean, that would be
Alexis,
unbelievably difficult.
thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate it. I want to
Mhm.
get to a couple of stats that Dawn found. Dawn is a researcher at heart with United Way of Greater Milwaukee and Waukesha County, so she always brings data to these discussions. Um, some of these stats I think are just mind-boggling. Do you want to go through some of these real quick, Dawn?
Yeah, absolutely. So Mental Health America stated that in 2022, 81% of workers reported that workplace stress affects their mental health. That's 81%.
Wow.
Which is just incredible.
Astounding.
Um, you had a few more data points from the American Psychological Association as well.
Yeah, 92% of workers said that it's very much or somewhat important to them to work for an organization that values their emotional and psychological well-being. And 92% also said that it's important for them to work for an organization that provides support for employee mental health. 95% said it's important for them to feel respected at work.
Mhm. I'd
And
like to
they
see
can,
some, statistics on, companies today that actively offer all kinds of support,
yeah,
including financial. I, back in the late '80s and '90s, there was no real insurance for mental health,
It's funny that
and
you say that, Brian, because there are 2 stats on here that talk exactly to that point, where only 43% of people reported that their employer offers health insurance with coverage for mental health and substance use disorders, and only 15% say that their employer offers company-wide mental health days.
yes. Well,
and
I
it
think in
was
my era, it might have been 5%
Yeah.
because I burned through so much money. Yeah, I was making a decent salary at the time, but it was cash. I don't know what it was back then, but it was a good chunk of money. Plus, I had the psychotherapist, and we were really strapped. And in fact, I called my psychopharmacologist, I don't really need to go to him any longer, but he doesn't take any insurance. A lot of them just don't want to deal with it. But companies, I guess I looked up too on the American Disabilities Act, and there are certain under certain conditions they can't fire you or demote you or anything like that.
In talking about workplace resources, Apollo talks about EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. It was a great resource for in the moment support, something that every employer should have on board. And I know Pradnya said that she's also benefited from EAP as well. So that is always good. I want to bring in Ying Chan. Ying Chan is watching from Hong Kong. She says mental illness has grown to be a silent pandemic. We are grappling with it here every day. Your frank and heartfelt discussions will help to save lives. Thank you, Ying. Really appreciate that, Ying. We've done some work with Ying in the past. Ying, if you weren't watching in the beginning, I actually made a comment. Through Digimentors, we've produced events for her when she was at Hong Kong University, and I actually made the point, Ying, that I was wondering whether clients or clients who do watch would think less of me as an individual. If I share that I had depression, or that at one point I walked away from a job for 30 days. It's something obviously I put it out there and I wrote about it, and it's all over social. But I still have that fear. I know my colleagues aren't. My colleagues at Digimentors have been incredibly supportive, and they haven't thought less of me. But I still have that. There's still that kind of how will people react type question. We're coming up to 8 p.m. Eastern time, 7 p.m. Central. We'll be we're going to go over just a few minutes, if that's okay with folks, because I want to make sure we bring in some statistics. We share some resources, Bryan, in every episode. We want to make sure people know that they can get help from various groups. One of them is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. They have a helpline, 1-800-950-6264. You can also text helpline to 6264 and visit their website, NAMI.org. A great resource for folks, and they have some really interesting data points. One in particular,
and they have regional chapters, right? I think there's one here in Westchester.
They sure do.
Regional chapters. The one quote here: 1 in 20 U.S. adults experience serious mental illness, and 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness. So, difference between mental illness and serious mental illness. We also have another resource that we share with folks, and that is some data from Mental Health America. You can call them or text 988 or chat at 988lifeline.org to get help. We want to make sure that people have access to these resources. If you click through to our website at the bottom of the blog post for this show with the video, you'll see these resources listed. And since Dawn and I are both survivors of sexual assault, we always mention RAIN, the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network. Their hotline is 1-800-656-HOPE, 1-800-656-HOPE. And every 68 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. And that obviously leads to so many mental health challenges and issues that we've seen. Our next show is going to be April 11th. We are on the air the second and fourth Thursdays of the month. So the second Thursday in April 11th, Indira Somani will be our guest. Indira Somani is a documentary filmmaker, a former journalist, and she is working on a documentary about her mom called Mom and Me. Her mom has had a 20-year struggle with depression. It's not something that's often talked about in the South Asian community where my family is from India. Much less our parents' generation, my parents' generation. The idea of talking about mental health or depression is just, you know, I mean, I talk about how the stigma around talking about it at work and confiding and coping in an immigrant
Mhm.
community, you just don't talk about mental health at all. And the fact that her mom is, letting her, and that she's doing this um, documentary is great. So we're looking forward to having her on the show
Mhm.
in April. Um,
The
I just
Holy
wanted to add a little
yeah,
plug
please.
that April is actually Sexual Assault Awareness Month.
Yes,
So we'll be mentioning that and talking about that on our two shows in April as well.
absolutely. And we'll certainly, and Kat, your friend Kat will be a guest
Mhm.
Yes.
April 25th for our second show. Apollo says this has been an awesome show, Neil and Dawn, and thanks for your story, Brian. Brian, really appreciate you
Mhm.
joining. Um, I want to ask you as we wind things down, and we're getting a few more comments. Alexis says, "Thank you, everyone. You all make a difference." Ying Chan, your point on partnerships is spot on. I look forward to exploring further with you. In case folks joined us late, I want to remind you that as soon as we're done, you will be able to watch the show in its entirety from the beginning on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on my website, wherever you happen to be watching now, you'll be able to watch from the beginning. Instagram, I need a little time before I can get the full video up, but I will get it up. And speaking of Instagram, Doreen says another great show. Looking forward to more in April. So thank you, Doreen.
Mhm.
Neil,
Um,
can you remind me what is the name of Brian's book before we
uh,
go?
of course, Dining in the Dark. And I'm getting it so it doesn't have to glare. Uh,
It's
a,
available in fine antique barns throughout New England.
a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and
Can I say
triumph
one thing? We
triumph
do.
over depression. I got to finish the subhead, Brian. Let me finish the
Okay.
subhead. Don't step on your own subhead.
Yeah.
What were you going to
No,
say,
we were
Brian?
mentioning children. We don't have time for that now, but how,
Yes.
when I was writing the book, I have a son who just started college, but I was writing the book over the past few years, and you know, I couldn't hide from what I was doing. I was very open. I told him, writing this book about depression. I basically, in a casual way, um, discuss it once in a while, not in any detail. But I said, there's a lot of dark stuff in there, but I'm fine. So the book came out. So he was a junior in high school at the time, or senior in high school, and it was on the living room table. And no, I gave him a copy, and he took it up to his room, and it sat on that table for 6 months, for a year, to a year and a half, 2 years, and 3 weeks ago, he emailed me from his bedroom and said, "Dad, I read your book." And he's first thing he said was, "I laughed out loud," because there's a lot of funny stuff in the book. But he said, now now I know what you're talking about, and it sounded really bad, but I read it. He took him over 2 years to open it. I don't know what that says, but maybe he just didn't.
He was finally ready.
Yeah, he just wasn't ready for it, and because I didn't keep it a secret, uh, I thought that was the best approach. I think it turned out to be the best approach.
Well, that
That's
harkens back
excellent.
to our
Mhm.
episode, Don, with Candice Sanchez, our second episode, where we talked about the impact that this has on our children and the fact that they're watching us and picking up on our behavior. There's concerns that they will, you know, uh, adopt our behavior in terms of depression and anxiety. But if folks are interested in that, they can certainly find episode 2 on our website. Again, the website for this show is neilparekh.org, Shining Light on Shadows. neilparekh.org, Shining Light on Shadows. You can find old episodes and several blog posts. A few other comments before we wrap up. Naomi Service, who has been a loyal viewer, sorry I missed the show, but we'll rewatch. I'm sure it was full and frank. And yes, you can rewatch from the beginning. And Naomi, if you do watch on Facebook, feel free to put in comments and we'll try and respond afterward. Rochelle says, thank you, Bryan. You're a gifted speaker. So you're not just a good writer, but you're a good speaker as well, Bryan. Melissa Lutke, who, another journalist, sports journalist, looking forward to your book coming out in the fall, Melissa. The incredible empathetic handling of a really tough illness. Melissa is writing a book about her work breaking the gender barrier in sports locker rooms back in the day. So looking forward to that. And I think, Melissa, you did mention the offered to be a guest on our show as well. So let's follow up and see if we can make that happen later in the year. And Rochelle says, so great to speak so openly and compassionately about the silent epidemic of depression. And I'll just repeat that. So great to hear people speak so openly and compassionately about this silent epidemic of depression. I can't think of a better way to end the show, Dawn.
Thank you, Bryan, so much for being on today. We really appreciate it. We are definitely a little bit over today, but well worth it.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Melissa says we'll make it happen, I hope. And my mom says, thank you, Bryan, Neil, and Dawn. So with that, thank you for joining us again. Our next episode is going to be April 11th, the second Thursday of the month. And our guest will be Indira Somani, focusing on the South Asian community and depression among our elders, my parents' generation, at least. Thank you. And if you do need support, we've shared some resources. Feel free to reach out to one of us. We'd be happy to connect you to others if need be. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.